Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There you go, right down there. If you want to be among the first to hear my weekly takes, NFL, college football, more, right there. All right, it is time. This is sort of the semi-official start. John or I may miss one Sunday, but this is kind of the official start as we move into August very quickly. John, former NFL scout, 3 and out. You know, I was thinking about it this weekend, that it's been an interesting summer. Copa, the Euros, the Olympics. There's just been a lot of big events, and my kids are doing a lot of traveling. Is that I used to always view like August as a kid, 4th of July to Labor Day as summer. And I still have a little bit of time I have to burn before the football season, but it feels like August now, these damn schools, high schools and colleges start by like August 12th. And it's like, what happened to August? Like my kids are starting college like early August. So do you have a big August plan, or to you is August football?
Yeah, to me, July. We've been gone for a month. We were in Tahoe and home with our family. But talking to, I don't have kids yet, but a lot of people's kids go back to school early to mid-August at the latest. When I was in high school and even at Cal Poly in college, we didn't start till probably a week into September. The quarter system, UCLA, Oregon, they always had a big advantage in college because their first couple games, school hadn't started. So when I see these schools, junior high, high school, and college going back in a week, that's crazy to me. That's insane. Yeah, to me, I'm back in the football mode a little bit, but I'm a podcaster. You can podcast from wherever, but I don't really have anywhere to go.
I keep telling people before we get into NFL, I don't recall a year I'm more excited for college football. And I'm a Pac-12 guy, and it imploded. The big networks, Fox included, wanted an AFC, NFC in college football. Venture capitalists will probably own the sport within 5 to 10 years. But it was, so I got into this discussion over the weekend with a friend up the food chain at USC. And I said to this person, I said, take out Saban. I said, this stuff takes longer than you think. That this person, we were talking about Lincoln Riley. And I said, when Harbaugh got to Michigan, he actually overachieved in the first year. They went from 5 to 10 wins. I watched this first game. It was a win at Utah. I said, they weren't that good. They really didn't have a lot of NFL guys, but just power of personality. They got very physical, very fast, and the Big Ten wasn't as good as it is now, and they won 10 games. 2 years later, they won 8, and he was getting ripped because he was polarizing. And I said this. I said, what Brady Hoke did to Michigan is sort of what Clay Helton did to USC. Didn't kill the brand, but the rosters were so depleted. And I said this to the person that was critical of Lincoln. I said, does everybody understand how bad it was at USC? They weren't only 4 and 8. I was told that Lincoln and his group looked at the players and thought they had 33 guys that they could use, like could play. So as I look at their schedule this year, it's full of Penn States and LSUs and Notre Dames. They're not playing, these regional schools. They got LSU and Notre Dame as out-of-conference schools. What does USC have to win so you, John Middlekauff, go, I'm good with that?
Well, my buddy Guy Haberman and Yogi are doing Big Ten games, and they were back in Indy for the Big Ten, the media days, which is like 4 days long because they got 18 teams. And you start looking at the conference, are we sure they're not a 7-5 team? I mean, is that possible? I mean, I know you're a USC homer, and listen, I root for West Coast teams, but
same.
Is 7-5 is 7-5 on the table? Do you acknowledge that?
If they can't beat Michigan, so Michigan lost 18 pros, new coach, and then really lost their best coaches, assistant head coach. So I think it's a much bigger rebuild than people think at Michigan. So my guess is if they can beat Michigan and go 1-1 to start, I think they win 8 to 9. If they go 0-2, 7's on the table.
I think the problem, and you use Harbaugh as an example, Jim was a Michigan man, right? So he resonated with the people there. He was part of them. And in college, more than the pros, That's a big deal. No one gives a shit where you're from in the pros, right? You can be an LA guy coaching New York if you're winning, great, vice versa. In college, it kind of matters. And let's face it,
Yeah.
Lincoln is a Texas guy, had all his success at Oklahoma, came here because they paid him a lot of money. And I do think the money factors in. I mean, are they paying $120 million if they go even 8-4? And this isn't his doing or his fault, but Oregon's going to be really good. Dan inherited a much better program. They had a lot more talent because of the way Mario recruited. But if they're 11-1 or in the conference championship game and in the playoffs, and they're 8-4, not even sniffing the playoffs, I do think it just gets weird because you're not one of them. And we see this in college football a lot. Our buddy Jim McElwain, he was having success at Florida. I mean, look at that place before and since, after Urban Meyer in the last 4 or 5 years, they ran him out of town. Now, it's different with Lincoln than Jim McElwain. He's a much bigger name, bigger brand, has more success at a higher level. But if you go 8-4, you start asking yourself, Penn State's rolling. I mean, if their quarterback is just decent, they should win 10 games. Like you said, Michigan, okay, they take a step back. Ohio State's got the best roster in college football. Oregon can't be far behind. Matt Rule knows what he's doing in college football. Luke Fickell, it's just a really hard conference. The other thing is, like, random teams in that conference, an Iowa or a Minnesota, always have an upset throughout the season. So it just becomes very, very difficult. And you know these people, a lot of rich people behind the USC program, and they're cutting enormous checks. And the bigger check that you start cutting, I think the more the questions get crazier. You see it in the SEC all the time. The reason they're as crazy in terms of the turnover with coaches when they stop, because the amount of money they're paying to not just the head coach, but the assistants. You have GMs in college football now. I got buddies making $300,000-$400,000 grand. They're just in charge of recruiting. So, I mean, I have buddies that scout in the NFL for 15 years that don't make that. So it's a money thing. And the expectations, you could argue it should be easier in theory with the transfer portal to get better fast.
So it's 2024, and let's talk about something really, really important. If you're ever injured, check out Morgan & Morgan. It's America's largest injury law firm, and they are there for you. Over 100 offices nationwide. Think about that. More than 1,000 lawyers with over $20 billion, that's a B, $20 billion recovered for over 500,000 clients. Things happen in life unexpectedly. Submitting an injury claim with Morgan & Morgan is really, really easy. Like, winning in the NFL is hard. We know that quarterbacking in the NFL is hard. Submitting a claim is easy. You're ever injured? Check out Morgan & Morgan. Their fee is free unless they win. For more information, go to forthepeople.com/Colin or dial pound law from your cell phone. Morgan & Morgan has a proven track record of fighting for you to get a full and fair compensation if there's an unexpected accident in your life. And I've had a few. By the way, what's going to happen in college football in the next year? This is really a thing that's happening. So I've talked to 2 different athletic directors. Is these college programs are going to hire general managers. Because right now, these guys don't know how to work their cap. So let's say, I'll just take USC. They're making somewhere between 13 and 15 million NIL. That's what I've been told.
You're saying that's their budget to pay players?
That's their annual budget. They're building new facilities. That money's always easy to get. Boosters love facilities.
Put their name on it.
Yeah, right. NIL are getting about 13 million a year in that ballpark. They don't know how to spend it. They don't know. They just don't understand quite. They need a general manager. So I think what's going to happen in college football in the next 18 months, a guy like a Chris Peterson who works at Fox, a guy like a Chris Peterson, you hire Chris Peterson, you give him a good salary and see, Chris, you just run the cap. You organizationally kind of run our personnel. You don't get the heat of the coach. And I think that guys like Chris Peterson are going to have schools throw 7 figures at them and say, can you run from a personnel standpoint, organize our football program? Because these schools now are paying high schoolers, not seniors. They're paying juniors to announce they're going to the schools. So I think there's a massive shift going on. UCLA can't compete at all. Thank God they're moving to the Big Ten because the home attendance will buoy their revenue, but they have a debt service every year. They're in big trouble.
Did you see the highlight of Deshaun Foster talking at the
not
big?
good.
Which is crazy because he was a high level college player, a good NFL player. It's not like he's never been in front of the media. He's not some lifetime coach. It was pretty. It felt very UCLA right now and kind of Mickey Mouse, and they're going to be terrible. Jake Rosenberg, who I was DMing with this weekend, who I used to work with the Eagles, who was one of Howie's right-hand men with the cap, who worked in finance before he got hired with the Eagles, left the Eagles and created a company and is now working with Oklahoma. He's literally signed contracts and worked with these contracts, and his business will only grow exponentially quick.
Right.
Because, again, obviously 13 million is less than 200 million NFL salary cap, but it's still, these guys aren't used to. And philosophically, Kirby Smart, I've heard, is very uncomfortable getting to a certain number with a high school kid. He will pay his own guy once he gets established or pay a transfer portal guy. But in terms of a high school kid, I mean, Nebraska, Dominic Riola, who I think is the dad, I forget the kid's name, who's the quarterback. There were rumors he got $4 million. And you follow college recruiting probably closer than I do. We have seen a million number 1, number 2 overall guys. The guys that turn into Andrew Luck and Trevor Lawrence and Caleb Williams, those guys are actually the minority. The majority bounce around, become average, get benched. That's a very risky proposition. Like you said, you don't have 50 million to deal with. So if you're going to allocate several million, wasn't the thing a couple years ago with USC? I guess it would have been 2 years ago when they had Jordan Addison and Caleb. Weren't those guys taking like 80% of their NIL money to the 2 players?
Yeah.
Now, they were worth it, but still, I mean, you better get it right.
It's a much bigger mess than anybody in the sports media is talking about. It is a shit show. It is. These schools are paying juniors in high school. Some of these guys take the money and then they flip their senior year to the school that comes in like in Oregon and pays more money. So it's a mess. So general managers are coming. I think venture capitalists could own chunks of college football programs. But it's pro football. And the other thing athletic directors are going to have to go through over the next couple of years, John, all these sports are driven by football. Basketball makes money for men and women at a lot of colleges. After that, they all lose money.
A lot of money.
A lot. I mean, but it's hard because if, let's say you have a swimming program or a golf program and it loses $1 million a year, but your third biggest booster in the athletic department supports their kid who's on the swimming team. So it's very, you have to be very judicious with your decisions, because a lot of times the biggest boosters, their kids, they got a scholarship in golf or swimming or water polo or fencing out east, hockey. And it's like the sport loses us $3 million, but the guy gave us $8 million. I think if you really privately asked athletic directors what they could do, they would all shave off 20 programs, 25 programs. You can't make money. And so I've said years ago, you should privatize football. But a lot of the biggest boosters at these schools are not football boosters. And so, but I'm here to tell you, there's guys out there, the Chris Petersons, Bob Stoops, those guys now, people are going to start calling them and say, do you want to run the program? You're the GM. Here's $1 million a year. Just organize this stuff, run our cap, and or ex-GMs at 55 who are just burnt out from crazy owners. There's a new industry starting in college football. General managers are a year away from being hired everywhere.
Well, that's why you're going to see it this year, and it's only going to grow the next 5 years, is the wiping out of all the random colleges when it comes to football. I was at the gym today, and this guy who looked like he played football was decked out in Washington State football gear. It kind of made me sad. I mean, we grew up on that program playing in big games. They're going to turn in closer to UC Davis in the next 5 years than they are back to Washington, because the money the SEC has made. I mean, look at the SEC, the amount they pay college basketball coaches now. I mean, they're a college basketball conference now. I follow college golf because a lot of the top guys go on to the PGA Tour. All the college golf programs in the SEC, they fly private because, like you say, they have big boosters. They have the football money behind it. And the Big Ten is not going to be far behind as they start making gobs of cash now that they've gotten Oregon and USC And it's inevitable. It feels like Notre Dame, and those programs go, and the SEC gets Florida State and Clemson over the next decade. It's going to wipe out the little guy. And I started at Fresno State. They don't have a snowball's chance in hell to survive. And it's going to become the NFL light. Because I get a lot of questions like, why doesn't the NFL invest in minor league football? I said, why would they? College football produces all their talent and they don't have to spend a penny.
Yeah.
So why would they spend any expense on developing players besides once they have them in their own building when college football is doing it for them, right?
Yeah.
They're spending all and football, like you said, makes all the money in college sports. It's also the most expensive program to run. It's why, where I grew up in Northern California, St. Mary's, Santa Clara, when I worked for Pat Hill, he played at Riverside. Those programs back in the 70s, Pete Carroll played at the Stockton
Pacific.
Pacific.
Yeah.
They all cut football after a while because they couldn't afford it. And that's back, they were bare bones. So it just becomes, how does Washington State or Fresno State or New Mexico, whose programs forever, they were playing real football, how do they survive moving forward? And the answer is they just don't. That's just the way kind of business works, right?
Yeah. And for the record, you bringing up Pete Carroll's somebody that USC could hire and just say, you're our general manager. Pete would be great. He loves the school. The school loves Pete. So keep your eye on, for anybody listening, to Chris Peterson, Bob Stoops, Pete Carroll. These schools, they're looking for those guys to step in. Pete Carroll, wouldn't that be a great way to close out your career? He's got great energy. Pete's on USC's campus. He's the ambassador running USC football.
Well, why do you think most people would agree that Bill Belichick more than likely is going to at least get interviews and probably get a head coaching job? No one thinks Pete Carroll is ever getting a head coaching job again in the NFL. And I'm sure you saw the story last week. Kyle asked Bill Belichick if he wanted to be his defensive coordinator. Right. Bill wasn't interested. Why wouldn't he ask? He didn't ask Pete Carroll, who he'd gone against for 8 years. Didn't even he runs Pete's defense. And it feels like Pete, in a weird way, is like this relic where Bill, who didn't have, Pete had more success the last couple of years than Bill. And listen, I agree. I would hire Bill over Pete because if you really followed Pete, like their defense was terrible, some of his moves, but it feels like Pete is just done. He's too old. And Bill's like, yeah, he's old, but he still knows what he's doing.
All right, forget what the calendar says. The football season actually, to me, starts Saturday. The Baltimore Ravens open their camp for the rookies. DraftKings has a best ball millionaire contest. It is the biggest fantasy contest ever. We're talking 15 million guaranteed dollars in the prize pool. 15 million from DraftKings. That's a big number. With two millionaires being crowned for first and second place. That is life-changing. If you're a set it and forget it type, then best ball is for you. No waiver wires, no roster management, bigger rosters so injuries won't end your season, only the draft, and that's it. You are set for the season. I like that, right? So you can play it and have a life too. Check it out. This year, DraftKings offering everyone a draft one, get one special. Everybody gets this. Your $20 entry fee, that's it, $20, scores you a bonus ticket. So get ready for the best ball week at DraftKings. Download the DraftKings app. Takes 90 seconds. Put in the code Colin. That's me, Colin. All customers who enter NFL Best Ball 15 million millionaire contest get a bonus ticket. Only during Best Ball week, only on DraftKings. Yeah, it's interesting. I think, all those rings and trophies for Belichick just puts him in a different class.
Yeah,
and,
that's true.
It's like I always sort of laugh if you look at these bands that haven't had a hit in 40 years, they're still making millions a year playing at Foxwoods Casino. Once you're a legend,
Garth Brooks hasn't had a hit since the 90s.
And you're still making 10 million a year minimum. Celine Dion. So I think Belichick is just such a legend that he'll just make money on being Bill Belichick forever. Pete, had he won that second Super Bowl and that interception by Malcolm Butler, maybe he would be in more legendary status. He's more in a Mike Tomlin thing. Yeah. But I also think Pete's got a place, I think, in the North Shore in Hawaii. He's happy. I really think for Pete embracing USC, they love him. He is the most popular coach in the history of USC is Pete Carroll still today. I wish he would literally sign up and run their football management team, because I think that's where USC is going. So I'm looking at all these new contracts, and it really is interesting. I'm totally comfortable with Jordan Love's, and some of it's just this, because I fashioned myself as a poor man's scout. He's bigger than Tua. He's faster than Tua. He's got a better arm than Tua, and Green Bay almost always gets offense right. That's my bias. Whereas Tua's smaller, don't love his arm, not as athletic, and Miami screws stuff up. The Tua $212 million, I'm a little uncomfortable with it. I don't think I would have gone there, but I think to myself all the time what Jay Glazer once said, the worst great job in America is being a football coach, driving to the stadium knowing you're going to win 6 games. And if Tua's upright, you have a chance to win 11. So I just think I trust the Packers. Jordan's bigger, stronger, faster, better whip. Where are you on Tua? 212 over 4 years. Would you have gone there?
And $170 million guaranteed is insane to me. I think there's 2 ways to look at it. That contract to me is jaw-dropping. I think most people that have watched him play go, that's crazy. That's insane, because you have no shot to beat any of the top quarterbacks who are all in your conference. And we just saw last year, you were like, what were they, 8-1 or 9-2, and the other Bills were 6-6, and they still ended up winning the division. Why? Because Josh Allen translates in November, December, and January, and your guy doesn't. But there is value in just being relevant and competing to make the wild card every year.
Yes.
So why can't we find some middle ground of, like, Alex Smith never made Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers, or Tom Brady money, but like he was getting Harbaugh and Andy Reid to the playoffs, and there was value in him. And now we've got to the point of like, well, you just got to make this much. Why? Why couldn't you just offer him Daniel Jones money? Like $90 million guaranteed. Cut that guarantee in half. Who are you bidding against? Like, thing with Dak, if he hit the open market, other people would be interested. The Raiders would take him in a heartbeat. Like, and he's proven like every single year you can win 12 games. Tua, it still feels like, is he even that good? But he clearly, you could win with him. You have a good offensive coordinator. He's a good guy, like the character stuff. But his physical flaws, one, he's a relic. He's a true pocket quarterback, bad athlete relative. And I heard what was your analogy about the furniture with your quarterbacks?
I like my quarterbacks like my furniture, big and hard to move.
Okay, so the old school quarterbacks, anyone that's ever met one of these guys, Carson Palmer, Eli, or Peyton. Did you see the pictures of Peyton at Team USA practice standing next to all these guys that are 6'7" to 6'10"? He does not look that much smaller than any of them.
I know it.
The Mannings are huge. Carson Palmer is a giant. Phillip Rivers is huge. Well, that's how Tua plays. The problem is he's 6 feet tall and he's got a weak arm. So he doesn't translate to the winter. Well, he plays in a division with cold weather teams. So I get investing in him. And if you would have said, hey, they signed him to a 3-year, $100 million deal and they guaranteed every penny, I'd be like, I kind of get it. But to pay him enormous money, I think is insane. I just don't know. Like, when it comes to Jordan Love, if you and I polled every GM we know and said, who would you take for this next 5 years, Jordan Love or Tua?
They'd all take Jordan.
It'd be unanimous. It would be 100%. So Jordan Love technically signed for less. That's what I just think. Listen, I don't get it. I'm shorting the Dolphins for the next 3 or 4 years. I'll tell you that.
Well, and here's the other issue. In 32 years since Brett Favre arrived, it's been 32 years since he stepped foot. He was a Packer. The Packers have the number 1 rated offense in the league, second winningest team to New England, and have never in 32 years that I recall have a bad offensive line. So if you look at the ancillary reality of Green Bay, Jordan Love will get better protection on average and better coaching on average. So Jordan Love got paid less and has much better support system. So, I mean, Stephen Ross is one of the richer owners, but do you really trust him? He's always been a distracted owner. And Miami hasn't had a great offensive line since Don Shula. So my take is, not only don't I love the Tua contract, but let's just be honest, over 5 years of it, He'll have middle of the pack O-lines. And there's the possibility that they won't draft terribly well. I mean, Green Bay is, I said this the other day, like there's certain people, if Spielberg makes a movie or is involved in something, if you go to his like movie page, it's almost always good. He has B projects. He doesn't have any C's. Like Green Bay, if they had a bad season, it's because a quarterback got hurt. I mean, they're B to A minus, virtually B plus to A minus every year of my life. So the other thing I don't like about Tua is Marino had Shula. I don't think Mike McDaniels, I guess the way I would say it's this. There are about 4 organizations and 4 ownership groups I just trust implicitly, and Miami's not one of them.
No. I think people often ask, like, why have the Ravens stayed so consistent over now 2.5 decades? They've had the same people there forever. Yep. So Eric DeCosta, who's now in charge, worked for Ozzie Newsome for 20 years. Well, when you look at the Packers, it's kind of similar. Maybe coaches, they go from McCarthy to LaFleur, but Gutekunst worked for Ted Thompson, who worked for Ron Wolf. I mean, the carryover of the philosophical beliefs of the organization have not changed. The non-negotiables of what you look for in players, the way you develop. Obviously, in Green Bay, they love offensive coaches. And I think when you look at Jordan Love, I don't think they get enough credit because the way our society works, we're always on to the next. For when they pulled the trigger on drafting him, I mean, it was pretty ugly. They got destroyed. Charlie Munger says, if you can't handle, the 50% downturns, you deserve the mediocre returns. Well, that was ugly. I mean, it created this weird dynamic with Rodgers. It was crazy. Even though Rodgers, remember, was coming off that kind of weird season their first year. But when they did it, well, 3-4 years later, it's paying off big dividends. Now, there's still risk involved. Like, there's still some unknown with this player. He's only had 8 good games. But I don't know if you have watched any of I watched a little bit of his press conference, I think yesterday, and I saw a clip today with NFL Network is there. Just because he's been the backup, you haven't really heard. He's pretty impressive.
Yes.
Just as a guy and just his maturity, I was like, damn, totally. This has a Mahomes, Josh Allen, the way he carries himself. And obviously, like you said, first off, you have to have the physical. Alex Smith checked every box except weak arm. And, if he had a great arm, he would have been Aaron Rodgers or something, and that's what this guy has. He has these physical characteristics. He has the infrastructure around him, and then he has the maturity. I think I don't know if he's going to be the Aaron Rodgers 2.0, but how's he not going to be pretty damn good? And listen, my life, Joe Montana was a little bit before me. I remember as a kid, he was more on the Chiefs, then Steve Young, and then Jeff Garcia, who was nowhere near as good as those two, but he was still damn good going to the Pro Bowl. I think this guy has a chance to be like their version of Jeff Garcia, but actually closer to Rodgers or Favre. And that's why I think they feel really good. Now he got $75 million signing bonus. He will get $75 million. I think it's 3 $25 million direct deposits between now and like mid-December. So they're pushing all their chips in the middle of the table on this, but I think you ask people around the league, any person that watched them, if you're a fan of the Packers, you go, yeah, I get it. I would do it. Or it's the opposite reaction of Tua. Like, did you need to do this? That's my question. Did you need to do this? Well, a little NBA. When NBA teams just max out guys, like you're a 40-win team. You have to pay this guy $200 million? You don't.
Right. Well, I also think last year when I watched Green Bay, I actually thought it was Matt LaFleur's team. When I watched them, I thought, I feel like I'm watching Matt LaFleur's play calling, and I think you have to kind of, the Jets or the Packers with Aaron Rodgers, it's kind of Aaron's team, and that's you just deal with that. Even Brady, as great as he was, especially in New England, maybe less so in Tampa. I mean, Tom kind of let the coach call the plays. Peyton always kind of ran the offense he wanted. Yeah. So I feel like that's the other thing with Jordan Love. Really coachable, really easy. The other thing I wanted to kind of jump into is I don't know why I'm so interested in this, but I am. This is kind of my thing. I talked to Dave Wanstead about this. So this is not an opinion by me. This is the truth. When Russell Wilson gets married, he doesn't have 10 players at the wedding with Ciara. He's never been wildly popular inside of his locker rooms. And he's been good. It's like generally good looking, rich guy, beautiful wife. You'd be just by, just the way the world works, you'd be kind of popular. He's not really. We've seen players in Denver. We've seen players in Seattle, coaches take shots at Russell. I like him, but he comes off to a lot of people as inauthentic. So, and I don't think he's changed. In fact, he's befriended, I've been told, Mike Tomlin more than any teammate. Like because Tomlin, by the way, is like Russell, wealthy, worth $75 to $100 million or more. So he's befriended, Tomlin, not a teammate. And then here comes Justin Fields, who to the last day in Chicago, despite being the worst fourth quarter quarterback in like a decade, players loved him. He's young. He's a nice guy. He's supportive. He's secure in himself. He just doesn't, he's got a Zach Wilson thing. He struggles post-snap to read a defense. He just struggles with it. He doesn't identify certain things. Zach and Justin, I see everything except that. But now Russell's banged up, and Justin's a guarantee is a great practice player. And here's my thing. You look at that Pittsburgh schedule, there are a lot of 2-game losing streaks in it. I mean, if they don't get that O-line right, there's a lot of 2-game losing streaks. And you tell me, having worked for the Eagles, Russell has a 2-game losing streak. And like right now, Justin's crushing it at practice. It's a young roster. Players like Justin. Like, I think that's a fascinating potential mess. Do you think they replace Russ, or do you think he's been guaranteed a starting spot this year?
I think it's already getting weird. I mean, he's already injured. It's late July, pulled calf. He feels like a weathered guy that's 34, 35 years old. And partly is the way he's looked the last couple of years. I've said forever, if I was a Steeler fan, I would want no part of Russell Wilson starting, because we hire Arthur Smith, who we've seen resurrect Ryan Tannehill's career.
Yeah.
Now, I would say Tannehill been a little more accurate. This guy's a better athlete. Can you get anything out of this player? The other thing in Pittsburgh, what's that territory? Like right by Ohio State, a lot of those fans watched Justin Fields succeed. Remember the game he had against Clemson, the playoff game? I think he threw 6 touchdowns. There's stuff there. I would just want to see that guy. When I think the Steelers, going back even before I was born to throughout my youth to this team now, they just have guys. Like when you think football players in the like TJ Watt, feels like everyone likes him. Cam Hayward's the man of the year. Minka Fitzpatrick's like one of Saban's favorite players. And it doesn't feel like those guys are going to be into this at all. I mean, at all. And the other thing is, let's face it, Russell's more of a dink and dunk guy now, and they have explosive players on that roster. My guess is, I think now who knows? We'll see if he can, by the time within a week and pads are on, if he's back at the starter. It would not shock me if Justin Fields is a starter very early on. I wouldn't even put week 1 out of the realm of possibility. They're not invested into this player. I mean, they're in for $1 million. So it means you can't get a player of his status any cheaper.
You know what's amazing? So John Snyder was number 3. It was Pete, Russell, and John Snyder. Snyder almost left because Pete was taking over too much of the personnel.
To the Lions. Didn't he almost leave to the Lions?
Yeah, he basically almost agreed to terms. Pete got fired. Russell got traded, and now John Snyder overwhelmingly runs the Seattle organization. Yeah. So I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I think he's a very good drafter. And as much as I like and admire Pete Carroll, I thought he underachieved with his talent the last couple of years. I am a team that's completely under the radar is Seattle. So Geno's not the future, but more than capable to win 10 games in the NFC. I think of all the teams in the NFL, and I try not to be a homer on this stuff, but I'm from there, and so they hire McDonald, the young defensive coordinator from Baltimore, and people are like, he's DeMeco Ryans 2.0, super smart, comes from a great organization. Schneider's a funny guy. I won't go into too many personal things I know, but he enjoys his life. He's tremendous at what he does. I think Schneider's great at what he does.
He's a top 5 GM in the NFL. Anyone in the league would tell you that.
Yeah, he's an excellent drafter. And I think he got frustrated the last 2 years of Pete. I mean, he hit on a couple of really nice offensive players, and it's just not working. So I actually think, and again, I like Pete. I think this young coach I think they have a chance Now, they don't have the right quarterback to be a little bit like Houston, where they're forgotten. So McVay and Stafford, I mean, that's just, they get a lot of attention. The Niners get attention. Kyler gets attention. The Lions do. The Packers do. I have this weird feeling that Seattle is going to shock people, and they're not a Super Bowl team because I think there's limitations at quarterback. But, much like Brady left Belichick, went to Tampa, and you're like, shit, Tom really overcame Bill a lot in the last few years in New England. It's not great for Pete if this new guy comes in and they crush. But I went and looked at their two deeps this morning. John, they got a ton of talent. They don't have a great edge rusher. Outside of that, their receiving core, their running backs, their corners, Jesus, their tackles, they are talented.
Well, let's not forget they made the playoffs 2 years ago, and last year they were in the mix basically the last 2 weeks, right? And you could argue their receiving core, the top three guys are the best in the league. The group of the three. I have a hard time. I think there are two major question marks for me. One, the division's good. So do you like Geno Smith against the Rams and the 49ers? I mean, the Niners haven't lost to him in a long time now. And anytime you get a new coach, I had a buddy that worked with him in the Ravens. They called him Boy Genius. I mean, he's special. D'Amico did get C.J. Stroud, and his division was kind of down last year. Anthony Richardson gets hurt. The Titans had an awful year.
That helped CJ.
And the Jags were weird. I mean, by the end of the season, even the Cardinals, if they're one of the worst teams, like if they're the worst team in the division, they're a problem. The other thing is, I always struggle with coaches. You saw this with Urban. It was a different scenario, but a guy that has zero NFL experience. Matt Rule had 1 year as an assistant O-line coach. They were head coaches. But Ryan Grubb, who was DeBoer's right-hand guy, went with him to Alabama. Then John Schneider and McDonald offered him the job. He's never coached in the NFL. Now, he's clearly been an awesome offensive coordinator for a long time, but that's a pretty big jump. And like you said, listen, Geno's an incredible story, easy guy to root for, but I just don't like him against the Niners, and I do not like him against the Rams. Yeah. But they have the talent to win 9 games for sure. And if they're better on defense because of their offensive talent, I mean, Kenneth Walker, that guy's a baller.
Yeah, I thought they should have. It was my take last year in the draft. They should have taken a big swing and gone for a quarterback. I think what my concern is next year at Shedeur Sanders, just too much about himself, really worries me. The kid at Georgia is great, but he'll be gone. Seattle has a chance to get into quicksand here, where they're winning like 8 games a year, drafting 13th, and have to sell the farm.
You become the Raiders. You have a lot of good players, but you have no quarterback.
Yep. And I think, and although Geno's more than capable, I get into this discussion with GMs and executives in the league. The league's gotten smarter. First of all, fans have gotten smarter because gambling's legal. So fans are more analytical now. So football fans 10 years ago and football fans today, when I talk to them, fans are much smarter today. If the media guys like you that commit to it are much smarter today. The coaching's much smarter. Belichick and Pete Carroll look outdated. Tomlin offensively, shit, how many years do you get to fix the offensive line, Mike? It's like 6. Andy Reid did it in 1 year. McVay did it in a year and a half. Like it can't take this long. So I just look at Seattle and I think, defensive coach. But I think the fascinating story with the Seahawks is John Schneider, this guy who was sort of suppressed under Pete. He survived. And, Paul Allen died. Pete kind of filled that void, used a lot of that power, made some mistakes, which, by the way, Pete, if you asked him, I've been told, acknowledges those mistakes. But to your point earlier, Pete and Russell Wilson have fallen off the football map virtually overnight.
I think it's very difficult. Like, if you're a computer programmer, or you're some guy at Google or Apple making millions of dollars, but you're just in an office. It's like, if you're weird, who cares? I think it's very, very difficult to be a weird quarterback. Obviously, different people have different personalities, but like, you can be a weird guard or a weird safety, but as a quarterback, you're so reliant on not just the face to the fans, to the owner, to the coach, to your teammates. It's why most guys are just pretty smooth cats. Like, they can just hit you, just go, That guy could be the CEO of a bank. He could start his own company. He could be a high school football coach. He could do whatever he wants. And with Russell, the most bizarre thing is that everywhere he's been two places, but they just have a lot of like, I would say those Seattle teams, they had aggressive guys, but they're pretty authentic. Like Sherm,
Yeah.
authentic guy. They just had a lot of just Doug Baldwin, high level guys. And none of them just, they like sniffed out, like he couldn't just be normal, like wouldn't give out his phone number. You got to call my people. It's like, bro, what are we talking about here? And at first I thought, is he putting on like a facade? Is he trying to be? But I really think maybe he didn't start as this person. He's morphed into this guy. But whatever it is too far gone. And I just don't think the Pittsburgh, wouldn't you say it's Pittsburgh, Ohio, the last place that type of stuff. They got Seattle, progressive, West Coast, whatever. He's the best, most talented quarterback they'd ever had, whatever. But I just think Pittsburgh, I think Justin Fields, if this injury lasts at all and Justin is just serviceable in practice, it would not shock me at all if he's the starting quarterback week one. Would it you?
No, not
What
really.
do they have to lose?
Well, again, I guess it would surprise me because Russell doesn't have a history. He usually overcomes his injuries, so that would surprise me. But I do think people are just saying it's Russell's team. I think it's I've been told that he's really connected more with Tomlin than any teammate. But I also look at, I was really close to my teachers in high school. It was my football coach, my basketball coach, the women's PE coach. I was closer. I had 2 or 3 really close friends. And, Russell came from, there's some Ivy League connections here. And we all kind of beat up on Russell, myself included. But, Russell just doesn't have a lot of immaturity in his DNA. He just doesn't. He's like Kirk Cousins. He feels like he was 27 going on 43. And Russell, to me, is like, he's just not one of the guys. And I feel bad for him. My son is a little bit like this. My son, he like skipped junior high. Like he was talking politics with me when he was 13. Someday I'll write a book and put an incident that happened at his high school in Las Vegas. He was creating security systems. Some of it's intelligent. Some of it is just he's a unique kid. So I have a soft spot, that for people that just don't hang out with their age group, their peers. And sometimes I feel bad for Russell.
To me, I struggle with that excuse because wouldn't you say Tom Brady pretty early on and Peyton Manning? I mean, their maturity levels, and maybe it's just they could balance to like be one of the guys. I mean, Tom Brady was resonating with people in his locker room that were 22 when he was 44 years old. Like you either kind of have that or you don't. And maybe that's what you're saying is he just doesn't have that capability. You have to have that capability though to play that position. It's impossible to play that. Would you agree? Impossible to play that position if you can't resonate with anyone on the offensive side of the ball.
It's hard. I mean, remember this. This is almost implausible. He got benched. His college coach, he was a great player, said, we're going to move on. He had to transfer to Wisconsin. But Jesus Christ, he was great. It's North Carolina State. It's not Georgia. North Carolina State's like, we're moving on to immobile Mike Glennon.
They messed up that one up.
But it's interesting. I mean, there's the sign. Like the coach is like,
think about it.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this today. Jordan Love, do you think it was easier for him just to sit, keep his mouth shut? Obviously, he had a lot to learn, but he was coming from Utah State. Josh Allen coming from Wyoming. Patrick Mahomes coming from Texas Tech. I think sometimes, like, let's face it, Caleb is an incredible prospect, ton of hype, but, like, I don't think he could just sit for a year. I think it'd be very difficult. I think it's very hard for some of these guys coming from these big programs, these spotlights in this modern day society, where you get some of these guys from these smaller programs who turn out to be awesome players. It's easier for them to kind of mix in because of they're not used to flying first class, essentially, when it comes to the football world.
I think it's much harder for young athletic quarterbacks, Josh, Lamar, Vic. I think when you're athletic and you're a better athlete, and that matters so much in pro sports.
For sure.
You're a better athlete than the starting quarterback. Now, you're not cognitively, line of scrimmage, pre-snap, you're not in the same class. But I do think players are impressed with athleticism. And so I think when Russell walks into the league in that camp and they had Matt Flynn, and 3 weeks into his Seattle tenure, Pete's like, players like that guy. Yeah. So I think it's easier to be Jared Goff, to sit back and go, I'm going to wait a while. I think it shows maturity that Jordan Love, who, in the end, the last couple of years he was in Green Bay, he was much more athletic than Aaron Rodgers, and he didn't say a peep, which tells me he's a pretty mature kid.
You could argue his story, Colin. Do you remember last year, I think around the bye week, Gutekunst went on record. It had not been going well. And said, I'd be lying. These next 11 games are kind of going to determine his future. And I was kind of out just because I was like, oh, this guy's been around a while. And then he turned into Aaron Rodgers.
So was I.
And within, I don't even know what's July, under 12 months, he made $155 million. And they deserved a lot of credit. Remember, they worked out that kind of weird short-term contract because they're like, I don't even know if he's worth the fifth-year option yet. And it just shows you, I think they were set on the guy. But ultimately, football, more than any other sports, truly about production that leads to wins. Listen, in the NBA, you can produce and lose and still get paid. In football, you could not produce and lose and stay on that team.
I'll make an argument. Jordan Love is a bust with 80% of the teams in the league. And
you go higher in that.
Trevor Lawrence and Justin Herbert with the Packers would now be considered top 4 quarterbacks.
Agreed.
Is that Green Bay, fans tend to think it's just a zero-sum game. It's like, you got talent, you play, you're great. Jordan Love goes to the Raiders. He's done. He's a backup in the league. Is that even in Green Bay, he just needed support. Then he played, and they gave him support. And Green Bay last year had, Aaron's last year in Green Bay, their O-line, PFF had it at third best. They're never bad offensively. But Jordan Love is a case study on Green Bay. This thing, he had a pot bust in college. He sat for 3 years. He was awful his first 6 weeks. The organization gave him a wonky 2-year deal. He is a backup in the league on virtually everybody except Green Bay, which is just a credit. Trevor Lawrence, people are doubting him now. If you put him with Andy Reid of the Packers, what do you think Trevor Lawrence is today? Give me a break.
Give him Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay. He's not as bad. I think it's more that it hasn't been the hype. Like, he didn't look like Andrew Luck or Peyton Manning, and he got $200 million. It felt like a pretty aggressive investment based on the way he's looked. But I talked to Doug at the Combine, and Doug loved him. And he kind of wrote off last year. He's like, I don't think people realize how banged up he was. Obviously, the turnovers, the fumbles, he's got to figure that out. Do you ever bet over-unders on the season?
Yes. So I love future bets. So 2 years ago, Minnesota was at like 8.5, and I just sold the farm. I said, that is a terrible mistake by Vegas. They won 13, I think. Last year, I said, do you realize the Rams were at 6.5 in Vegas? I said, timeout. They're just an older Chiefs. Great offensive coach, great quarterback, one great defensive lineman. Outside of Cooper Kupp, we don't know what they are, but pretty good protection and kind of young on the defensive side. I said, now Mahomes is better than Stafford. I said, but they kind of line up with Kansas City, a weaker version. They're winning 8-9 games. So the team this year, listen, I don't think they're great. Denver's under is 5.5. Left tackle, excellent. O-line was rated 7th by PFF. One of their guards is top 4 in the league. Excellent offensive coach. 2 solid NFL running backs. An elite corner and safety. Linebackers move well. 1 good defensive lineman. They drafted an edge rusher. That's a weakness. Mims could be an excellent 2. Cortland's sort of a weak 1, but 2 dependable receivers. Serviceable tight ends. If Bo Nix just runs the plays, and I do think there's a Drew Brees thing here, they can't go 7-10.
Yeah, to me, that'd be a pretty easy overhammer. There are some, can they make the playoffs or whatever with a rookie quarterback?
That's different.
5.5 feels insanely low. I was looking on our friends at DraftKings. I usually don't do over-unders because for me to get the juices flowing, the number's got to be like $5,000 or $10,000. And I don't want to just have it sitting there. But I saw something that I'm like, I'm all in. The Chargers to make the playoffs are plus 110. So you're not even having to pay a vig. You're getting plus one odds on this. This is the best quarterback he's ever had. They invested in another offensive lineman. They're going to be able to run the ball. We know wherever he's gone, they've been good on defense. Wherever and let's face it, you get to 10 wins with that quarterback, you're probably the 7th seed. I like them a lot more than the Dolphins this year. I think that was my favorite, just long-term. I think the Chargers are in the playoffs. I mean, Jim Harbaugh has a long history. The other thing is I've watched a lot of just Charger content. Jim, and I was around him for a couple of years when I kind of got into radio. When he was with the Niners, and I think early on Stanford, he had this huge chip on his shoulder. He was just hard to be around, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the championship or the last couple of years in Michigan. He feels a lot lighter. I know you know the Spanos. He feels a lot easier to be around. And there's a looseness, I don't know if it was insecurity, but he just tried to be this bull in the china shop nonstop. And it feels looser, but he clearly is better at his craft now than he's ever been in his entire life. And he's been good at it since he started coaching. How are they not really good? I actually think if you just go, well, I can see the Chiefs kind of just cruise control. I don't know. They just won the last 2 Super Bowls. Is it out of the realm possibility they win the division? I mean,
well, first of all, it's San Francisco. That was a great team, but they weren't. It was Crabtree and a lot of guys at receiver. At Michigan, it was Colin Wilson and just a bunch of guys. His great teams have always been okay on the sideline.
He's never needed it.
And so when people say, well, they're not great at receiver, that has never been an issue. Stanford, did he ever have one great receiver at Stanford? I don't think he did.
Doug Baldwin, who was like a 7th round pick.
Yeah. So Niners, I remember Crabtree, and that was about it. They missed on a couple of receivers. Michigan last year didn't throw the ball in the second half on the road against Penn State. And so I kind of look at it and I think, and the NFL also, and I love this is the opposite of the WNBA, which couldn't figure 2 years in advance. We should probably give Caitlin Clark an easy opening schedule, let her go like 6-5. The schedule, they basically gave the Chargers, just if Herbert's upright, they're 4-1. They gave their weakest games early. First of all, they want Harbaugh to win early. It's good for the league. They want Aaron Rodgers and Mahomes to win early. But that Charger schedule, and remember, Herbert in his entire high school, college, pro career has been hurt once last year. 60 quarterbacks played in the league last year. You start looking at that schedule, it's reasonable to say in the league now, if you have a Josh Allen that doesn't get hurt or a Herbert who historically doesn't get hurt, you're going to face backups. By Thanksgiving on, you're going to face backups. I think the Chargers are – that Joe Alt pick was so Jim Harbaugh. I mean, by the way, Notre Dame and Northwestern, super smart physical tackles. Herbert, tough physical kid. He went and got 2 running backs, I think one from the Ravens. You can see what he's doing. Like, he's just laying out the blueprint of what he's done his entire career.
Well, have you watched the Giants Hard Knocks?
Oh, yeah.
So when you watch, the GM seems like a nice guy. Dayball, just your classic football guy. They're just kind of freelancing. They're like, what do you want this year? I think we need some O-linemen. Let's Saquon. Maybe we'll bring him back. Maybe we'll want. Where Jim, everyone that follows football goes, it's laughable that anyone thinks he's taking a wide receiver at 5. He's taking the star tackle who clearly wasn't going to get drafted in the top 4. He's going to be sitting there for him. And that's exactly what happened. And then he took a slot receiver in the 2nd round, right? I mean, he's just, These are the type of players he likes. Well, the Giants are just kind of freelancing. And in football, philosophically, the way it doesn't change year to year. You make tweaks. You hear McVay and Kyle and Andy, you tweak it. But their football philosophical beliefs have been set in stone. I mean, Jim Harbaugh's probably thought about this since he was talking about coaching with his dad when he was in college playing for Michigan and Bo.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's the way Andy's thought about football since he was playing at BYU. It hasn't changed that much. And you watch the Giants and you go, when I was with the Eagles, and I was a West Coast, spent my whole life on the West Coast. I was more of an NFC West guy. You go to the NFC East. I'll never forget being on the sideline. Those Giants team came out huge on the defensive line was massive. I mean, every guy was 6'5 plus, and the offensive line were all big, tough guys. And it was like Eli and a bunch of tough guys and old Tom Coughlin. And now you watch him, you go, the Chargers, who have a clear identity, and Harbaugh's only going to keep doubling down the next couple of years, and it's going to look exactly like a Jim Harbaugh team. Well, the Giants, you just have no clue. Let's just take a sweet wide receiver who is really talented, but that makes no sense on your team right now with an average arm quarterback, right? And you just see, and I remember telling you this when I went to the combine, because sometimes when you're just following the league on TV or when you're around the teams and you see it, you're like, 70% of this league has no shot. I mean, none.
None.
McVay and Kyle and Andy and the Ravens, the advantage they have, it just grows by the offseason. You know, it really, the Giants, you know, back in the day when you were living out there and I was in Philly, they were a well-run Jerry Reese, Tom Coughlin. They had a true identity. Like there was a reason they could go.
They had an
toe-to-toe.
identity, a true identity.
And now they got none. And this notion that like John Mara only wanted to keep him as a popular player. No, he was their best player. And where did he go? Did he go to some shitty team? No, he went to the best run team in your division. Like, so I understand exactly. Are we sure? And then you go, well, how much did he cost? Well, Howie paid him $26 million guaranteed. It's not like he cost $50 million. These running backs now, it's like anything in society. They used to cost a lot, and now they're cheap. Now they're a bargain. I can get Saquon Barkley for $26 million. If I don't love him at $45 million guaranteed, but I get him well under 30. Easy deal if I'm Howie.
You know how that's going to play out.
Awful. So they're fired. Everyone's fired.
Well, yeah. I mean, he's going to have two things because they have excellent receivers, Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. You can't put your safety in the box against the Eagles.
And a good tight end.
So against the Giants, bad O-line, safeties jam the box.
Yeah.
Saquon's going to have, there's a chance he could lead the NFL in rushing. And they're going to play the Giants, and they're going to cook up special plays. You just see how this is ending with the Giants. And it's so funny. I said for years I thought the New York Giants were the accounting firm of the NFL. Boring, but strategic and efficient. You trust them with your money. I don't think they're well run. Watching Hard Knocks, they just feel like they're making stuff up. I like Dable, but there is a component to that show that I'm like, if I'm a Giants fan, I wouldn't feel great.
Well, the one thing in my experience about Howie, and still know him to this day, is like he has the answers. Like his capital is his information. Like he has to know everything because you can't make decisions with investing in players and making trades if you don't have all the information. And you saw during the offseason, it's like, yeah, we think he's going to go to Chicago. No, he's going to go to the Philly. I mean, it doesn't get any, especially when the owner does not want to lose him because he's their best player, most marketable player, and he's just a high-level good guy. And then he goes to the team that's won your division 2 out of 3 years, went to the Super Bowl 2 years ago, even with a disastrous ending to the season, was still in the playoffs where you die to be. It's really crazy that the Maras, they're a high-level family. It shows you when you hire the wrong people in football, college, or the pros, GM or head coach, you got no shot. And it just derails you. And since they fired Tom Coughlin, which it was time, they have just consistently hired the wrong people, coaches, Gettleman, and it's made them just feel like not that relevant in the NFL, which is pretty crazy.
John Middlekauff, former NFL scout, 3 and Out podcast, Go Low Golf. We are back, mostly. We may miss one more.
A lot of Olympics to watch, Colin. I was watching Simone Biles. She was battling through a calf injury.
By the way, how long do we have to keep pretending that Embiid's a winning player? Jesus, give me a frickin' break. Jokic, when he was on the floor, Serbia played the USA 81-81. When he was off the floor, the USA outscored Serbia 28-3. And I mean, in my lifetime, there have been 3 basketball players, Magic, LeBron, and Jokic, that make every teammate better. Michael Jordan didn't make every teammate better. I mean, there were times that Durant doesn't. There's a lot of great players. They don't make everybody better. Jokic, take Jokic off that team. What are they? Embiid was so bad in stretches in that game that, so he now can't elevate his team to a win in the second round of the Eastern Conference. He's a bad fit on the Olympians. He can't really be a complimentary player. He clogs up the offense. I never want to hear. Remember, they gave Embiid the MVP over Jokic. It was sort of an anti-Jokic vote. I'm watching him today, and I'm like, only Magic and LeBron do what Jokic does.
Yeah, I had 3 takeaways. 1, I think 4 of the best top 15 players in the history of the sport were on the court. Obviously, LeBron's like the second best player. Curry and Durant are top 15 players. Is Jokic that much different than those two guys, Durant and
No.
Steph Curry? I think he's one of the most remarkable athletes I've ever seen in any sport. I mean, I think he's underrated. I mean,
So do I.
I think he's underrated. Second, I'm out on the Sixers. Like, you got no shot. Daryl Morey, listen, smart guy, said we're coming after the Celtics. You got no shot. And 3, Anthony Davis takes a lot of shit, and rightfully so. He's been banged up, and it feels sometimes like he's always hurt. He's in a different universe as Embiid. I mean, you look at him in the playoffs, how good he's been the last couple of years. Like, this conversation with Embiid, what are we even talking about? Like, he's closer to the Paul Georges and the guys in the teens in the 20s than he is to the big dogs. Like, him and Jokic, it's like Mahomes and Tua or something. I mean, when you really break it down. Nobody cares about scoring 70 points against the Kings in January. It's like James Harden. Nobody cares.
Yeah, no, Anthony Davis, if you turn the sound down and you just watched what you're seeing, Anthony Davis is a monster. Yeah. Like, he doesn't look like, here's a fourth take. When you put Jason Tatum around alphas, he is invisible. So we always said this for years. Jaylen Brown was the alpha. Tatum was more talented. But this year in the playoffs, Brown wants the ball. When you put Tatum around other alphas, an Olympic team, he didn't get on the court. I mean, so Steve Kerr didn't put him on the court. Like, Tatum is so passive and so collaborative. And I remember somebody said this years ago, is most of the great athletes, like the Michael Jordans, you'd never want him as your boss. You'd never want to work with him. You'd just be miserable. You'd want to work with Tatum. You wouldn't want to work with Kobe Bryant or Michael or Bird. They're too feisty. Brady or a Manning, just really super intense. Tatum's a really talented player and a really nice guy. But there were games all through the playoffs, and I've noticed this watching the 5-0 exhibition run. He didn't play against Serbia. I don't know when he's on the floor. I can't tell when Jason Tatum's on the floor. He's just not aggressive. And when you put a guy that's kind of passive around other super aggressive guys, it can be in a car, at a kegger, on a basketball floor. Dude shrinks.
Isn't it crazy that the other 2 dudes on the Celtics are playing like major roles and the $300 million players on the bench, and no one even thinks it's that weird? It's pretty wild to watch, because obviously, I mean, it's LeBron, Steph, and Kevin Durant's team, and even Anthony Edwards. I mean, the moment he gets on the court, he sucks all the oxygen up. It was pretty fun to watch this morning, because for a minute you're like, is Jokic really going to play 1-on-5 with 4 other guys that wouldn't even make the JV team of this Team USA? And then obviously they just ran out of gas. But I thought if you watch that and you love basketball, you're like, this is one of the greatest players I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah. Yeah. The NBA is always style and aesthetics have always mattered in the league. I mean, Westbrook can't shoot, has bad hands, but he can be, optics are, God, he is so hyper athletic. I've had people tell me I hate watching Jokic, and I'm like, he's kind of a much bigger Larry Bird. Like, he just shoots. I mean, just like, take Larry Bird at 38 pounds and 4 inches. That's what he is.
My takeaway, would you be shocked if that team medals? Like, beside USA, he can go toe-to-toe with any other team. Right?
I think they
should
will
get
medal.
like the bronze. Yeah, I agree.
It's crazy. All right, John, good as always, buddy. We'll talk soon.
See you, Colin.